Welcome to the Neurodivergent Parenting Podcast. I'm Melissa Cox, and I will be your host. I'm here because, like you, I am trying to make sense of this beautiful mess of neurodivergent family life. Parenting is chaos with brief moments of order, but neurodivergent parenting is chaos on steroids. Each episode, we will sink into real conversations about this journey, not the Pinterest perfect version, but the real one, where we can share strategies that actually work for us, feel seen, heard, and build a community where we genuinely understand each other. So, whether you're listening while pacing your kitchen for the 10th time today, or finally sitting still after everyone else has gone to bed, you're in the right place. Let's figure this out together, one beautifully chaotic moment at a time. I am so glad to have my guest, M Burnham, on here today with me to talk. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm excited to be here. My name is M Burnham, and I'm an author and speaker who primarily focuses on neuroaffirmative practices in parenting, leadership, and self-discovery.
Nice. You will fit right in here then. So, I always say I like to start with something a little easier or more personal, even though I'm sure we'll get plenty personal because that's what this is. But you mentioned that you like to knit in your off time. So, what is the last thing that you enjoyed knitting?
I actually just finished a little market bag, something I can grab and quickly go to the market. And the pattern was so pleasing because it was a nice repeating pattern that I've decided I'm going to buy more yarn in contrasting colors and do more of these just as gifts and to have around the house
Yeah,
because it was so much fun.
I love that. I love a pattern. I crochet, but I love a pattern where I can just zone out and do something else, like listen to an audiobook or watch a show.
Yep.
It's fantastic. Um, so I am excited to hear about the book that you mentioned.
Yes.
Your book is The Art and Science of Raising Your Autistic Child, a holistic approach to manage meltdowns, improve social skills, and support neurodiverse family dynamics. Can you tell us
Yes.
about that some?
Sure. I'm excited to talk about it. It is my first book that of a series that I'm planning to do. And it's really the book I wished I had had when I was raising my kids. It was at a time when even less was known. In fact, my oldest, who, oh my gosh, just turned 26, didn't get her diagnosis until adulthood. And my youngest, who's only 2 years younger, didn't get hers until middle school. So I had to cobble together. I knew as a parent, you know what's going on with your child. And now I know why I was so into doing a deep dive into that kind of research at the time. And so I just over the years compiled all this stuff along with a lot of education in psychology and other areas. And I thought, this is a lot of information that could do a lot of good out there. I should just write it. I'd been trying to write books since I was in high school, mostly
Mhm.
focused on fiction, and I'd never really thought about writing a nonfiction book. And that came so much easier for me.
Yeah, because you were basically just info dumping, right? Like it's just info dumping with kind of
Yes.
a structure.
Yep, yep. I finally understand why I love public speaking as well. I get to
Yes.
info dump for 90 minutes on people who actually want to hear what I have to say.
Right. And then you pay me for it and you enjoy it.
Yeah.
The dream.
Yep, yep. So, I struggled a bit with writing the book. So in the past year, learned that I am ADHD. So now I understand why I have so much trouble organizing my thoughts. And I found AI. And all of a sudden, I could take all of my random information and thoughts and put it someplace and say, could you please organize this in a way that makes sense to other people and it flows and it
Yeah.
does all of this? And it was like game changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely appreciate AI for like the ability to organize information because somebody just mentioned the other day I was asking a question on social media about how people deal with time blindness.
Oh,
And because all of us tend to come up with that in some way, shape, or form. And one person mentioned um, a tool that I've used in the past, but didn't realize it had this function, Goblin Tools. If you've
uh-huh.
ever used that, Goblin Tools has different spiciness levels of how much how much depth you need to do a thing. So you can
Okay.
say, I need to do the laundry. And then it gives you step-by-step instructions on how that would happen.
Oh, that's
So
fantastic.
exactly. But the tool that I didn't realize was within there is that um it can give you a time estimate for how much time that will take.
Oh, that's lovely.
Right? So you get to kind of list out, okay, when we don't always have like a really great concept of how much time each activity we need to do is going to
Uh-oh.
take.
Uh-uh.
And so we either overestimate or underestimate, and
Yep.
then we show up either an hour early to an appointment or 15 minutes late.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it just helps to conceptualize that, right? Like I the workbook that I was just talking about before we got on was it's kind of to do that in an analog way, but it's really nice to be able to do that just by putting it into a web
Yes.
tool.
Yeah. 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 I found that same thing, and my girls actually. This is a tool I introduced to them. It's a self-care app called Finch.
Yes, my kid loves that one.
Yeah, yeah. And so that has been a game changer for both of them. And I used it for a while, but then found like
Yeah,
a little too
same.
much.
I used it for a little while. I don't know. I think it can be really helpful in certain ways, but it felt almost more demanding for me to keep up with the notifications
Yep.
than helpful.
Yeah, yeah. My girls have really tooled it to their own use. So they have very, very few things
Yeah.
in it. But for one of my girls, she uses it that's her medication reminder because it's a fun way for her to get that reminder as opposed to just this
I
notification. So,
I should add that on to my oldest kid's Finch because I'm every single day, I'm asking, have you taken your meds? Have you taken your meds? Have you taken your meds?
yep, yep.
We don't like the sensory process of having to take our meds. So it's like a struggle.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Oh, those sensory sensitivities are
Yeah.
a big one.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I was writing this book, I was reading a lot of the, recent research and stuff on it. And one of the studies that I found said that 90% of autistic
Yep.
individuals experience these sensory sensitivities at level and some of it to levels that can be very physically painful.
Yeah. When people talk about low support needs or high support needs,
Mhm.
um, that's what I think about a lot is like how many of us just are trying our best to ignore our support needs
Ding, ding, ding,
about
ding, ding, ding.
sensory issues and that's actually the cause of a lot of our meltdowns or distress or inability to do other things. um Again, like I that's kind of part of the workbook that I'm working on is listing all of those things out so that you can be more aware of just how many things are adding to your RAM, basically.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
all of those things are adding up, and it makes it so difficult to do the things that you think should be easy, right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is amazing how quickly that RAM gets drained
Yeah.
if you're not paying attention to what you're doing with it.
Yep. Because we're treating ourselves like we're neurotypical
Uh-huh.
and not neurodivergent.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially for the community of adult or late diagnosed individuals, we've spent, I mean, for me, it was 53 years internalizing all of this ableism and everything that's my biggest challenge in my unmasking and figuring out, what my authentic self really
Yeah.
is I bump up against that a lot. That and the
Yeah.
fact that my mind in particular, and I think for a lot of neurodivergent minds, we can get stuck in a thinking loop of things that are out of our control and focused on
Oh my
things we
goodness.
just can't simply change.
Yeah.
Um,
Because we wish that they were different. And I know I tend to fixate on the idea that if I just have enough information, I can fix it. And that's just not true.
yeah, it's either that or fixating on I know how to
Yeah.
fix this. Why won't anyone listen to
Yeah.
me?
Like if you guys would just let me run the world, then it would be fine.
Yeah,
There was
I,
a
I look
meme
back on
I
my.
saw a while, sorry,
Oh no, go ahead.
there was a meme I saw a while back and it was like them saying everybody's autistic these days and then the person looking around, there's trains late, there's planes not running on time. Like I don't think so. I don't think that that's true.
No, no, it's not. Definitely. Yeah, I in my previous career before I moved into the entrepreneurial world and now into the author and speaker world, um, I realize in hindsight why I was so successful. I was with one company for about 30 years, but I worked my way up and I got put into a leadership position fairly early on in my career. And it explained why I was so good at leading and directing and putting together systems because I had people underneath me who maintained everything.
Yeah. Yeah, because you just had to come up with the framework that they needed to follow,
Yep.
and you didn't have to be the one there doing the thing and making sure that it got done every single day.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah. That's so hard, right? And some of us, I mean, some of us neurodivergents like work in different ways too, right? Like some of us are much better at okay, I just need to do the same thing every day and keep up with things and have a very predictable schedule because I don't want to have to constantly make decisions and because that drains us
Yeah.
sometimes, like the
Oh, absolutely.
constant decision making.
Decision fatigue is a serious thing. And for the neurodivergent mind, we are making so, especially if you're highly masking, we are making so many decisions in the background all the time
Yeah,
that we're not even aware of. And so you think about the decisions you make in a day and then you layer that on top of it and it's like, oh, that's why I get to the end of the day and I'm exhausted. And it's why
yeah,
it's so important, especially as a parent raising neurodivergent children, to give them that space where they don't have to mask, where they
yes.
are free to just be who they are. And, I will say that my extended family has been such an amazing support system. And somehow we all, as we're all now realizing, most of my family's probably neurodivergent, is that we just
It's
somehow
genetic.
yeah, intuitively knew how to allow this to be. And so my youngest really connects to the world through TV. Like she explains a lot of her world through medical and cop shows, procedural
I feel that.
TV. Yeah.
Except mine is sci-fi and fantasy.
Oh yeah. I'm all of it. Like give it to
Yeah.
me all. And we just allow her to, and always have, to enter and exit conversations through TV, through references to her TV shows.
Yeah.
And I realized recently, like while writing this book and researching other things, just how important that was for her to have that, to never feel
Hmm.
like she couldn't talk
Yeah.
about it, or we were annoyed with her always talking about TV shows, like, or trying to
Yeah.
get her to talk about it in some other way. Just
Trying
let
to
her be
change
her,
her.
right,
Yeah.
to fit.
Just accepting people exactly as they are. If it's not a thing that hurts anyone, it's not a thing that affects other people negatively, like why? Why are we
Right.
trying to change it?
Yep. It's why there's it's a short, very, concise section in my book on the difference between like social courtesy and
Yeah.
masking, because that's something I hear all the time. She says, well, everyone has to mask, everyone masks. And it's like, no, no, they don't. Everyone
I
needs
think
to
that's so
conform to
important.
social protocols
Yes.
that you might not like, but
Like the autistic and ADHD people can be polite. We can
right.
learn. Like I think it's actually one of my friends actually talks about how she wishes that etiquette were still taught because it's it's a clear and like laid out structure that
Yeah.
if we all know it, then we could all follow it and it wouldn't be a constant guessing game
Yep.
to figure out like what is the appropriate response here, what is the appropriate way that I greet guests or way that I go into another person's house. If it were just taught, then or like formalized, it's like it would be easier.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. It's one of those things. Also, though, the other side of it is one of those things where some of that learning at a young age
Yeah.
prevents, especially young girls, from
Yeah.
being like diagnosed, from being seen
Yes.
for who they are and what they need and their supports. And so I go back and
Definitely.
forth with like,
Yeah.
how do we do this? Like, how do we impart this information in a way that people understand? Like, yes, we all need to follow certain social etiquette rules so that a
Yeah.
society can function and survive.
Yeah.
But
But
within that,
not to a stifling like point.
right. Within that, there is natural human flexibility that's needed,
Yes.
because even if you're not neurodivergent, if you're what I do not like the term, and this is something that I have done my whole life. I know I don't call it work-life balance. I call it
Hmm.
life-work balance, because the order of the words makes, is
Fair. Yeah.
a priority to me. So I no longer call it neurotypical. Because there's a lot of research that typical implies majority, and it's more like that's what the world is set up for. Not, it's turning out that may not be the majority neurotype. It's just the one that can organize itself best to put the rules in place.
Yeah.
And so I tend to call it neuroprivileged, because you are privileged to live in a world that was built for you.
Yeah. I think that's really valid. Is it is easier if that is your neurotype.
Mm-hmm. And
It's
so
not necessarily like everything is easy, just like any kind of privilege. It's just that that is one less thing that you have to figure out.
exactly. It's one less layer of complexity you have to navigate. It's
Hmm.
another way that you feel safe in the world, because it's built
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to, just like someone who is able-bodied doesn't ever have to
Yep.
question whether they can walk into a store that they want, or a restaurant or
Yep.
something like that. It's privilege. You can't change
Yep.
it. It's just what it is. It's not a
Yeah.
bad thing. It's just to be aware of it.
Yep. So you discovered you were ADHD like much later. When did the journey start? Like with your kids?
Well, I look back and I kind of feel like I should have known, and I hate the word should, but I used to say
Yeah.
things when I was with my youngest, because routine was really, really important for her. And I was like, this really helps me too. This is great. Like, I know what's predictable in my day, and it makes it so much easier. And it just never occurred to me. I just keep going on with my days. And then it was my oldest had moved out, and was coming back home, and she was expressing to me that her therapist had said, without a like truly formal diagnosis, just enough of a awareness, sounds to me like you're not just ADHD, which she was diagnosed with as a child, you're also autistic. And so we're just going to treat you now like that is your neurotype. We don't need to know more, because if it
Yep.
works for you, then that's good enough. And I was like, okay, I accept that. I get that. I believe self-diagnosis and all of this stuff is valid. So I'm going to start learning how to support you as an adult. What kind of supports do you need? What does this mean? And so I started picking up books and reading them. And I was like, wait a second. Um, that's my childhood you're describing. I've never heard it
Yeah.
written that way. Oh no. So at first I was like, oh, I must be highly sensitive person. Like this just checks, like all these boxes check.
Yeah.
And so then I started, of course, going into a deep dive of what all these things meant. I was like, oh, rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Wait a second, that explains so much about my life. And oh, wait, pervasive drive for autonomy. Wait a second, this is starting to layer a little too much.
It got a little too personal too fast.
Yeah, yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I've worked in this way. So in my previous career, I spent 30 years working in live entertainment ticketing and customer service. And I was responsible for all of our accessibility programs. And one of the things I did was implement and start one of the first sensory friendly performances for children in the area.
That's awesome.
And so I've always worked within this community and with it. And I really subscribe to the not without us philosophy.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I personally don't necessarily need a formal diagnosis to accept this as who I am, but I want to make sure that this is all legit, that I'm not conflating my childhood traumas, which can mimic
Yeah.
these symptoms or exacerbate them with this. I need to know for sure. I want to be able to stand up proud and say, no, I am a part of this community.
Hmm.
And to have something to say to the people who don't believe me, no, here you go. And so
Yeah.
I sought an adult assessment and found an amazing. Now, I am privileged to have the money to spend for this. It was not the most expensive I had seen out there, but it was the most well thought out. And from what I understand, very not traumatic for me. It was wonderful because all the assessors are neurodivergent themselves.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this psychologist took the time, they only use one of the standard assessments. And then she took the time to rewrite all the others into less problematic language,
Yeah.
but still valid and accessible. And so
Yeah.
it was actually a wonderful process for me. And I got that diagnosis, and it was like, okay, my brain went click. I accept it. I know it. Now I'm going to live it.
I love that. And I feel like so I am self-diagnosed. I am not seeking a formal diagnosis, at least for until my kids are grown, probably, because that's just it's so often for I've talked to many people over the years, like we only have so much energy and we only have so much ability to do appointments, to make all of the things in life happen. And I'm just trying to keep everybody alive right now and trying to get formal diagnoses for my own children, because even though like we've talked with therapists over the years and they definitely agree, it's still I would like for them to have a formal diagnosis. But you have to wait for appointments for at least a year out. A lot of times you have to there's the ability to get a diagnosis is so complicated.
Oh yeah, we struggle. I mean, and it's easier now than it was when I was trying it with my youngest was, I mean, my God, like what we had, I shudder at the parental guilt of some of the things we had to
Yeah.
put her through for
Yeah.
years. And we were lucky enough to end up in a school system
Mm,
that recommended us for certain programs to help get her diagnosed because
that's amazing.
school even recognized at one point
Yeah.
we were sitting in an IEP and the school said, look, we are absolutely certain your daughter is autistic, but we can't make that diagnosis. The
Yeah.
best we can do is label her pervasive developmental disorder, and that will give us the ability to educate her as if she were autistic. We can apply all this. So we were very lucky that we ended up in a school that was that well aware and informed and had the resources. And it still
Definitely.
took us from the time she was 4 until she was 11.
Yeah. I we were not as lucky with schools, so I homeschool my kids now
Oh,
because
such a great option if you can do it.
yeah, I basically like moved everything around so that I could work from home and could help my kids each day. And like we do a homeschool co-op, so that kind of takes some of the pressure off of me. But yeah, it's so many parents end up taking their kids out of school because if the school, you basically just have to be lucky
Mhm.
of like whether the people in it have the knowledge and the ability to help and the willingness to help.
Yep. We got very lucky when my youngest was headed into high school. We lived like halfway between the two schools she could go to, and so we were given the choice, which one do you want to go to? And we did not know this at the time, but we happened to pick the school that had the much more evolved and better um, educational system for her. And the other school, which they presented kind of the same,
Yeah.
a lot of times will come down to the teachers who are actually on site implementing it. And
Yeah.
her high school teachers, she prides herself on this. And they have given me permission to tell all of our family stories. So I just want to make that clear. In middle school, their father, my late husband, would be called down to the school weekly, sometimes
Yeah.
multiple times a week for behavior issues. And a
Hmm.
lot of it was just the teachers and the school not listening to us or to her
Yep.
with what she needed in the supports, right?
Yep.
She got into high school, it happened once and never again. And she's like, yeah, and never again. I changed. I got it. And I was like, yeah, honey, that's because we found the teachers in the room and everyone who
Yeah.
supported you and allowed you to have the space you needed to
Yeah.
step away. Because I had taught her to breathe mindfully to help
Yeah.
prevent her meltdowns. And some of her teachers in middle school would let her step outside and others
Yeah.
wouldn't. And
Yeah, it's still so dependent upon what other people are willing to let you do
mm,
because school can just be a prison for some neurodivergent kids where
mm,
you're like, I know what would help, but you won't let me do it.
yeah. And as a parent, I mean, our care team for our IEPs simultaneously loved and hated us because we made sure, I mean, I was like well informed and I knew how to do these
Yeah.
IEPs, and I was coming in with nope, that doesn't work. This is what works. This is what we do
Yeah.
at home. This is what you're going to do in the classroom. This is how we're going to change this goal. And we'd just sit there and I'd be like, nope, yep. And by the time we got to high school, after our first IEP, they were like, okay, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to do it? Let's look at this together. Because they
Yeah.
got that we understood her best and we were
Yeah.
actually paying attention at home and really focused on it. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, to the detriment of our other child, whose needs were not, her support needs were not as high. And that's
Yeah.
why in this book, I really took the support the whole family approach,
Yeah.
because I wish we'd done a better job of that with her. And she and
It's
I have
so
resolved
hard.
that, and we've
Yeah.
we've come to terms with it. But yeah, I still wish we'd done a better job for her.
And I mean, I think that we're all figuring it out as we go. And even though we have more information available now than you did when you were raising your own kids, it's still cobbling together like a million different things and trying to find the accommodations and the supports and the scaffolding that each individual child needs
Mhm.
and what we can provide because even sometimes when we know there's something that could help, that doesn't mean that like finances accommodate for that or insurance or just like the rest of the family, because if you have multiple children, there's sometimes you're doing the best you can and like one of the kids has a more emergent need
Mhm.
than the other kids.
Yep. Yeah. And if you're living, it's neurodivergent children, neurodivergent people in general are as wide a variety as anyone else. And so how learning how to support every child in your family and make sure that every child feels seen, heard, and supported in the way they need, it's it's just a ridiculous forest to navigate through.
It
Like,
is, and it's again, it's we're all doing the best we can
yep,
and that's enough. Like
yeah,
even
it
if it's
is.
not enough, it is as much as we can do. And we're only one person or two
Yeah.
people or yeah, like
We're all
I
limited
think
beings. We're all
yes,
limited. We're limited in our knowledge. We're limited in our energy. We're limited in our lifespan. Like we are limited beings.
yes,
And accepting those limitations is when we can actually navigate through them.
yes. I think that's so like that is a huge area of growth for a lot of neurodivergent adults who got diagnosed or didn't realize that they were until adulthood is realizing our limitations and accepting our limitations, like not continually trying to fight against them, but finding, okay, so that doesn't work. What can I do instead? What can I take off of my plate? Because it doesn't matter how much I want to do,
Mhm.
I literally cannot. I,
Yep.
I can't do as much as a neurotypical person can do.
Right. It's why in my book I give it's a really simple exercise and it's even available on my website, which is the where does my time go
Yeah.
exercise. And it is challenging when you try to do it, especially as a neurodivergent, but I can tell you that it is game changing when you can even just you try to do it for a week, but if you can only do it for a day, just writing down as you go through your day how much time you spend on every task and what those tasks are, and then breaking them down into what must get done, right? I have
Yeah.
to feed people, so I have to go to the grocery. Like
Yeah.
there are things that must get done, but of those must get done, how many do I actually need to do? Right? How
Yeah.
much of it is something I have to do, or how much of it can be delegated to someone else or done together or something like that that makes it easier? And what are things that I just want to do,
Yeah.
right? And why do I want to do them? Like,
Basically like stepping back so that we can reprioritize
yeah.
what we need to. So I, without ever having read your book, because we just discovered each other, I have effectively written a very similar book. Um, and yeah, it's the way that my brain works is sort of similar and more I describe my brain as a card catalog, and like everything needs to go in its place and everything needs to be categorized so that I can get a picture of like where I can find things, where I can fit things that need to happen into my day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and so yeah, the similar to what you're describing, it's like how do we assign an amount of energy? Like I use spell slots as my because I love playing role playing games and fantasy and stuff. So I use spell slots as opposed to spoons, right? Do you know spoon theory?
Yep. Oh yeah.
So spoon theory, I always loved since I discovered it many years ago, but
Yep. Yep.
it doesn't quite describe how neurodivergent people use their energy. So, I mean, I think it's like an amazing framework for a very basic explanation.
Yep.
And then when I think about spell slots, it's like you have different levels of spells, right? So you have different abilities that some take a lot less energy and some take a lot more energy. And so, how are you assigning those throughout your day and how many are you putting onto yourself? Because I know
That's
I tend to just pile on and pile on because things just all feel important. It's
yep.
we are as autistic people and neurodivergent people notoriously bad at like figuring out exactly how important things are like
Yes.
immediately. Like
Uh-huh.
prioritization is hard.
It is. It is absolutely. And what's really funny is throughout my life, I really have been putting in supports for myself without knowing
Mm-hmm.
why I needed them. And
Yep.
one of the things I used to do at work and that I trained my staff and other people to do is when your boss gives you an assignment and you feel like you have a lot on your plate and you don't know how to prioritize it, A, it's not your job to prioritize your work if your boss is giving it to you. And
Yeah.
B, you simply ask them. You simply tell them,
Yeah.
hey, I have X, Y, and Z on my plate. And to do those, and this, I'm going to have to shift something around. For you,
Yeah.
where does this priority fall? Because then I didn't have to prioritize it. They told me, oh, no, no,
Yeah.
that comes after the things you're working on. Great. Now I can set that aside. My brain doesn't have to think about it. It's sometimes as simple as asking someone else, what's the priority on this in a work environment or even with your kids? Like,
Well, I was just gonna say, like, that's so important to help kids understand is that I know as a child, I did not, it was not comfortable to ask questions
mhm.
because uh, very often the experience of ADHD people is when we are asking questions, people take that as an accusation. And we're literally like, I need more information.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah,
so,
the question about I learned not to ask the questions, well, what about, whatever?
yeah,
Because for a neurotypical person, apparently it implied they hadn't thought about something.
yes.
And it's like, no, I'm just asking.
And I mean, to a certain point, that is like sometimes they haven't thought about something, but we tend to see all of the possibilities and all of them are equally important in our brain. So we need to figure out what is more important for you. It's not an accusation, but I need to know.
Yeah. It's also the difference between bottom up thinking and
Yeah.
top down thinking, right? Bottom up thinkers, which neurodivergence can tend to be in this bottom up thinking, where we're taking in all the details around and making
Mhm.
decisions and functioning from that. And other people who are top down are thinking, I've got all this up here, and I'm just going to make assumptions about this down here. And so
Yeah,
when
and assumptions feel like terrifying for
uh-huh.
us.
But when you confront someone and they realize they've made an assumption that might not be true, I mean, naturally is going to trigger a defensive response.
Because they think, I mean, people in general, I think, like to feel that they are in charge of their ability to, I don't know things. And
Yeah.
it's an ego hit for a lot of people.
And it's a societal judgment. We
Yeah.
hear there's a lot of like just subtle societal things that go on around you're supposed to know everything, right? If you
Yeah.
hit this level, like I wrote this book, but I will tell you, I don't know everything about parenting autistic kids. Like that would be silly of me to like say that. Like, of course I don't.
Yeah.
I know from my perspective, my experience and my research, right?
Yes.
And uh, I don't take offense if someone says, hey, you didn't mention this. Like my RSD might kick in,
Yeah. But
but
that's an
that's not the
internal
same.
thing. And
Right.
that's something we learn how to deal with.
Exactly. And but I don't ever judge someone else
Yeah.
for not knowing everything about a subject or even about themselves. Like,
Yeah.
no judgment. No judgment here from me ever.
Because we're all just learning. I think that's also why I hyperfixate and deep dive into parenting neurodivergent things so much because so often I am reparenting myself.
Uh-huh.
And so any of the things that are directed towards parenting neurodivergent kids hit home for me because I'm like, oh, I need to go back and do that. Or I need to make a little more room in my day to have some grace for myself that I didn't learn to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Giving ourselves grace is so important. I mean, you've said it in certain ways, and I say it all the time, which is we're all doing the best we can with the knowledge and resources we have available to us at that moment.
Exactly.
And we need to not judge ourselves
Yeah.
by our current awareness. Don't judge our past actions and deeds by our
Yeah.
awareness because that's not fair to us.
It's not. And it it literally only steals our joy right
Uh-huh.
now or our peace right now.
Yep.
And it doesn't have any effect on past us. Like past us can't do shit about that.
Nope. We can't
Yeah.
change our past. All we can do is change how we think about it.
Yeah. Come to peace with it.
Find a positive lesson we can take away from it and grow from it. That's nothing in life is all one thing. Uh,
Yeah.
as as a fairly young widow, I can tell you, like, that was one of the hardest and most tragic experiences of my life. And yet I have profound growth and positive things that came from it. So,
Yeah.
nothing is one-sided. You just have to be
Yeah.
willing to look for it. And the positive doesn't wash away or negate the bad.
Yeah. So what do you feel has been like with your journey with your girls has been the most challenging part, I guess, of raising two neurodivergent kids? You just have
Food.
two, right?
Yeah. The
Okay.
food. Food,
Food.
food. Oh my gosh. Safe foods and changing safe foods. And both of them had completely different safe foods.
Yes.
One loved mushrooms, one couldn't stand the sight of them. Like, it was just like, oh my gosh, how do we make meals in this house that everyone can eat without making
Mhm.
different things?
That does get exhausting. We definitely have I have a vegetarian mostly like a they just don't like meat. They don't like it except processed meat because processed meat is always the same.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And so mostly vegetarian with, the diet like dietarily wise like the worst kind of meat for us, but it's always consistent. And I try not to assign like judgments to food because I mean,
Uh-huh.
I have my own, history
Yeah,
of food issues,
me too.
and as so many of us do. And yeah, like working through some of that stuff and trying to be really like not let my stuff become their stuff.
Absolutely. I sat with my youngest, this was very recently, and we were having a conversation around food, and I was explaining to them that for most of my life, yes, I've had safe foods. I didn't know what that meant,
Yeah.
but what I did know is I choked down a lot of food and I forced myself to eat things
Yep.
because it was what
You were
socially,
just
like,
supposed to.
yeah, I was just supposed to. And that I was real, despite all the arguments we'd had about food in her life, despite all of the frustrations and all of that, I was so happy for her that she had never done that to herself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the goal for me with most parenting stuff is that hopefully my kids will have to do less work and less therapy than I did, right?
Yes.
That's the only goal. Get you to adulthood with a little bit less.
Yep.
We're chipping away at the generational trauma. That's
Yes.
all we're doing.
I mean, honestly, that's all you really can do because there's
Yeah.
parenting is parenting. Like,
We're all figuring it out as we go. It doesn't matter how many parenting books you read because they don't know what they're doing either. Like
right,
none of us know
right.
what we're doing and we're all individuals. So,
And we all, as humans, internalize messages differently. So
yes.
even if you think as a parent you're giving a really positive message, you don't
Yeah.
know how your child is internalizing it.
Yep.
And more often, as I was talking with my mom recently too, as I was writing the book and saying that, like, wow, she really, my childhood, my early childhood before I went to school, and I was an only child, so she had that privilege of one focus.
Yeah.
But she really just intuitively kept me safe in that world, in a lot
Yep.
of like prepping me for where we were going, never forcing me to like do like
Yeah.
it was when I got into school and had to get into socializing. And then the positive messages and the messages at school and everything was, and I internalized a lot of weird things that I've had to go back and figure out, like, oh, that's where that came from.
Yeah. We're trying to figure it out in our child's mind. And that is not necessarily what was actually happening, but we made the best sense of it that we could.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that's like something I struggle with my own kids when it comes to the input that they receive, like from YouTube, which we try to limit as much as possible, because um, as one therapist that I loved that we worked with said, the issue with YouTube is that once it goes in your brain, you can't get it back out. And there's
Yeah.
so little regulation and there's so little it's just so hard to determine. Like they can start with something that's totally fine and end up, because of the algorithm, on something that
Uh-huh.
is terrifying and horrifying.
Uh-huh.
I
Yep.
don't know how much you encountered that with your girls.
You know, because of their age,
Yeah.
when they were growing up, that stuff was really just
Like,
starting to come up. And so we had
yeah.
we had kept them off of social media at all
Yeah.
until they were really in high school. And then we monitored, and my youngest really wasn't on social media until she was like a junior or senior in high school, until we were sure that she comprehended
Yeah.
enough about the safety issues and not
Yeah.
trusting what she sees immediately and all of that, because she's an incredibly trusting soul. Just, I love
Yeah.
her. It's so wonderful. And I don't want to take that away from her, but I want her to be safe.
Exactly. You want to like somehow capture and like put away the
Yep.
part of them that is so genuine and trusting, and yet build enough of a shell
Yeah.
that they don't get hurt all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's even now, she'll text me. I'll get a random text from her and she'll just say, "Hey, mom, this might look too good to be true. Can you do some research and tell me?" And
I,
so,
I think that's totally valid too, like getting our kids used to outsourcing that to a trusted individual. Like
yes.
not not just anybody, but to a parent or a mentor or someone to be like, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. Can you give me some feedback and say if this is also what you see?"
Yep, absolutely. And so in that, what I'm also doing is teaching her her own level of skills for researching
Yeah.
herself. So I used to just do the research and then give her what the
Yeah.
information was, because that's what she could handle. But now, she's taken some critical thinking classes, she's taken some other,
Mhm.
classes around these skills. And so I will do the research myself and I will say, okay, here are the sites. Here's why, you can look at these things. Here's where I looked. Here's what I read. I would like you to just go look at this, go see
Yeah.
what I did, and then we can have a
See what
conversation.
you think about it.
And she gets
That's such an important skill.
She says, she'll say to me, "I know you'll want me to research this on my own because you're trying to teach me how to be independent, and I know I need to do this." Like,
Well, but it's also that you're teaching, it's that you're teaching how to research
yeah.
and how to discern what is, because I mean, we know how many people will say on the internet, "I've done my research." And it's like, do you know what research is, sir?
Right.
Like, do you know what research actually is? No, you did some Google searches, is what you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I say it as someone who I got all the way through my doctorate until the original research portion and got really, now I understand why, disgusted with all the gatekeeping and rules and all of that. And I stopped my doctoral work. So
Yeah.
when I talk about research, I talk about research at a doctoral level.
Like I personally love reading research papers when they are about a special interest. So like the other day I was reading a paper that was published about clutter and about like how different people interact, and like sort of like the sociology and the philosophy of clutter and how people relate to it just
Mhm.
as a sociological thing, because that's fascinating for me, right? But not everybody loves reading research papers. And I have to say, I don't love reading research papers when it's about something I'm not interested
Yeah,
in.
me too. Me too.
And
That's
so finding the people that I, basically creating a web of neurodivergent people who like, what is your special
yeah.
interest? And when like then I know the person to ask and like, "Hey, what do you know about this?"
Yep, yep. My passion has always been, what does it mean to be human in every
All
aspect
the
of it,
time.
all the
Yes.
time, everything. And so it's no surprise that I have a master's in psychology and a master's in business
Yeah.
and
I
yeah.
think a lot of, especially a lot of AFAB people were raised in such a way that like we masked so heavily because a lot of AFAB autistic traits lean toward natural sort of masking ability because our
Uh-huh.
interests tend to be fashion or makeup or people and how do I people the best. And
Yeah.
even though it is killing us inside, we have learned how to pretend to be a
Oh,
person.
I started acting at a very young age
Yeah,
and taking acting classes and
me
improv
too.
classes. And I was on a path to be an actress.
Yeah,
That's what I was going to do until my RSD kicked in. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this. I'm
yeah,
not going to
I
go and get rejected 17 times a
oh my
day.
god. I loved opera and I loved singing opera, and I could not do that as a career. I just
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
have the ability to take the constant like criticism because and
Uh-huh.
you need criticism to
Oh,
get
yeah.
better, but the constant feeling of like I'm not enough, I'm not good enough,
Yeah.
even if you are,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the RSD is so painful.
Hmm. Oh yeah. In high school, I was in choir and I auditioned for the a cappella group. I'd been singing
Mhm.
for years.
Yeah.
And because I'm highly sensitive, because in a high emotional state, I can't control my voice and I can't
Yeah.
control the emotion in it. And I was at the time like 15 years old.
Yeah.
I had a horrible audition. Fine. I was like, fine, I'm not going to make it. Whatever. I'll sing in choir. Until the next day when the choir teacher called me and like three other people out and said, you need to re-audition to be in choir next year if you want to. Yeah, in front of the whole class. And it wasn't
That is
until
so
last,
inappropriate.
oh yeah, it wasn't until last year that I sang again. I stopped singing completely. I was
Yep.
like, oh, I suck. I'm awful. I'm
Yeah,
horrible.
it
Even though I knew
shut
that
it
wasn't
down.
true and
Yeah.
gone.
I yeah, I didn't start even singing for myself really until I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, but like it took like 10 years of not singing
Hmm.
at
Yep.
least. And that was even only for myself. And that wasn't like,
Yeah.
I've
Oh, I
only
didn't
just
sing in the
recently
shower,
started
didn't sing in the car.
trying to, yeah.
Nope. I would tell
It's
people my birthday gift
so,
to them was I'm not going to sing happy birthday to you. That was my birthday gift. Like that's how.
the level of rejection. That's so terrible. Like one of the things that I do try to impart on my kids is it doesn't matter if you're good at something. It it literally does not matter if you're good at something because so often if we if we as neurodivergent people find something that is really easy for us and people praise us about that, it is incredibly damaging if we don't feel like we are good enough at it or we get into perfectionism loops. We get my kids have some really like serious perfectionism loops sometimes, and I try to focus on like you don't have to be good at it. Do you enjoy it?
Yeah.
That's what matters. Because
Yep.
you can get good at just about anything if you really want to.
Yeah. And you don't have to get good at it if you just enjoy it the way it is. You enjoy it for what
Exactly.
it is. Life is about
Yeah.
finding the things that you enjoy, not forcing yourself to do the things other people think you should enjoy.
Yes, exactly. Even if you're really good at it, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it.
I am incredibly good at math. Math comes really easy. I hate it. I hate doing math. It's easy. Like I could probably go off and be like some kind of mathematician or in a
So
career
funny.
that you
I love math and I
well,
am terrible at it. Absolutely terrible. I love the idea. I love it when I understand it, but it's so hard. Like my mother had to teach me math because none of my teachers understood it. And she is also really good at math. She was going to be a mathematician and she was going to go work for the aeronautics and space it. Like she was going to go do like really serious math things. And she was the only one who could understand who I could understand it from.
Yep, yep. That's
So funny how that happens.
that was oh my gosh. My oldest would get so frustrated Now she is like super, like she would come out at 7 years old, walk out into the living room and explain to us string theory. Like that's her
Yeah.
level of deep dive into that kind of stuff. She would get so frustrated with her math because she had to do it. Like
Yeah.
not for anything else other than she's like, can't I just take the test and show you I can, why do I have to do this fifth like
Yes. That
ages?
sounds like my middle kid. My middle kid is that kid where he's just like, I already know how to do this. Why do I have to show you again that I know how to do it? And another reason that we now homeschool. Just flat out refuses to do worksheets more than once. Like he's like, I already showed you. This is dumb.
This is a you problem if you don't get that I know how to do this, not a me problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what else do you want from me?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. This has been like a fantastic conversation. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about
Oh my gosh.
before we
We covered so much.
it's an ADHD conversation, so it goes in loops and swirls and twists and turns.
I'll tell you, that has been the best thing of really stepping into this role that I'm doing now and engaging on podcasts
Yes.
and interviews is that it's just me with my people and
Yeah.
get it.
It's
And it,
so easy, right?
uh-huh.
It's so easy when we're just talking to each other.
Yep. Yep. It's wonderful.
Yeah. It's so much easier when we're not trying to make ourselves into something that we're not.
Exactly.
Do you want to mention again where we can find you and where we can find your work?
Sure. Right now, my book is available on Amazon and on Ingram Spark. And you can find my website, which is Perceiving Possibilities. I have a blog I'm writing every so often on just topics around what I've discussed here today. There's information about my books and other resources that just a small amount right now that'll grow over time, but resources that I've put together and used on various parts of my journey and my family's journey. So I
I
would love
love
to
that.
connect with anyone that way. Also, I'm on Facebook and Instagram with Perceiving Possibilities.
Okay, awesome. This was lovely. I love to talk to all of the neurodivergents. I just want to have all the conversations. This has been an episode of the Neurodivergent Parenting Podcast with Melissa Cox. We are part of the Neurodiversity Media Network. You can find the Neurodiversity Media Network on YouTube and anywhere that podcasts are. You can find Melissa Cox on Facebook at Melissa Cox, Blue Sky at melissa-cox.bsky.social, on TikTok and Instagram at living_with_disaster. And you can always catch us right here again for the next episode. Thanks for joining us.